I am the great and powerful Ziki, and I am here to deliver a message from my tiny typewriter. The message is I have an important announcement about client libraries at Replicate. So, we were hosting this thing, we were calling it a bake off between two companies, Stainless and Fern. And TLDR is Stainless is the winner. And I'm going to dig into what that means, why we're working with them, what a client library is, etc. in this video. So short answer is, if you don't want to watch the whole thing, we're working with Stainless. But if you want to know more about how this integration works, what they are, what client libraries are, etc., keep watching. So I have a document in Notion here which describes the client library bake-off. I'll start from the beginning. What is a client library? It's a piece of software written in a specific programming language that lets developers or software engineers interact with the product. So you've all heard of NPM. If you NPM install Replicate, you are installing Replicate's client library, or Replicate's SDK, which stands for Software Development Kit. Same thing with Python. If you pip install Replicate, you're installing the Python version of the client library. So we've had these client libraries for a few years now, and they're the main way that developers interact with our product. We have official client libraries for Python and Node.js, and then we have a bunch of other client libraries in different programming languages, some of which have been created at Replicate, others which have been created by members of the open source community. But we have some problems with these. So the main one is they've never really had an owner. So different people have come and gone at Replicate and been involved in the maintainership of these projects, but they've never just had a dedicated person or a dedicated team who is working on them full time to keep them up to date, well documented, well tested, etc. So as a result, the maintenance has been very sporadic, the documentation for them is incomplete, and we don't actively engage with the open source community to improve them. Also, our clients are currently handwritten using human written code, and there's no automation around syncing changes between our HTTP API and the code that's in the client libraries. So every time we change our HTTP API, someone has to go in and update the client libraries to reflect those changes. Or in some cases, they just don't do that, and the client libraries tend to drift from the reality of what our API is capable of. So all this results in us leaving our users out in the cold with a subpar product experience. So we need outside help. And to do that, we wanted to work with one of two different companies to help us improve, maintain, document, test, and continuously distribute our client libraries. So there are two well-known companies for this. One is called Fern, one is called Stainless, and we decided to host what we were calling a bake-off. So basically hiring both companies for a trial period to work closely and in earnest with them on developing new versions of our client libraries. So we did exactly that. We started contracts with them. During Summit this month, we signed those contracts, and for the last couple weeks, I've been working closely with these teams to evaluate their products and try them out. So here are the criteria that I was initially using. What's it like to collaborate with them? What is the developer experience of using the product? Both the client library experience for the end user, but also our experience of maintaining the client libraries using this product. How well documented is the tool? How easy is it to use? What is our path to migrating from our current client libraries of today to our better client libraries of tomorrow? And then lastly, what kind of bells and whistles and features do these products have that we can use in the future? So I created this table early on with both basically a bunch of criteria that we want satisfied, and then notes for both Fern and Stainless for each of these. So I won't go into too much detail, but the gist is we wanted to have different levels of abstraction in the client library. So we want a low-level API, meaning sort of minimal wrapper client around our API that you can use that sort of takes care of authentication and setting the right headers and things like that, but that you can use in a more free-form manner. So this is perfect for things like undocumented APIs that we want to distribute to customers, but we don't yet want to commit to hardening that API as something that we are officially announcing in production or making ready for a general audience. The mid-level API is something that we're talking about for generating one-to-one mappings of operations in our HTTP API. So for example, if you go to replicate.com/API, each one of these operations in our API already exists and is well documented. And ideally, we should have a corollary function in each client library for all of these operations. So that's what we're calling the mid-level API here. This is something that is dynamically generated from a schema. Lastly, we have the high-level API, namely replicate.run, which is like an even higher level abstraction around the primitives of replicate for running models. So this requires humans writing code that take our existing mid-level APIs, stitch them together, and make them slightly more sugary or ergonomic or simple to use. So with both Fern and Stainless, we wanted to evaluate how do they support these things? What is the process for contributing custom code on top of the generated code? So they both have different ways of doing this. Don't want to get too much into the details here, but it's all pretty well documented in this table. And we went through a bunch of different things like how does their documentation work? How do they handle versioning? How do they handle releases? How do you do testing? How do you do staging builds? And then we also dug in a little bit to some sort of fancier cutting edge features like generating MCP servers and stuff like that. So here's why I think Stainless took the cake, so to speak. The qualities that made them stand out are that they have an experienced and responsive team. So in the first week of the bake-off, we had no fewer than 8 people show up in different Zoom meetings with me to help unblock progress on development of the TypeScript and Python client libraries. They're also super responsive in Slack. I've just been really engaged in that channel and getting lots of helpful responses from them. Also, their product, Stainless Studio, is just very intuitive and well documented and just powerful and easy to use. So I'll give a little demo of that after we run through this. They have built-in support for TypeScript, Python, Go, and other languages. So that's the sort of main set of programming languages that we care about for our users. They have an amazing diagnostics tool that helps us find issues in our own API spec so that we can improve them. They generate JSON docs for the whole API, including code snippets for all languages. So this is really great for the web team, for example. We're not one of those companies that just uses an off-the-shelf docs generator. We have our own sort of custom front-end tooling for rendering pages, and we want precise control over how our pages function and how we display them and how we want them to be branded and all of that. So really what we want for documentation is not an auto-generated docs site, but the underlying JSON structure that describes all of the documentation. So Stainless does a really good job of exporting that automatically with every build. So they also just have tons of automation, things like I got an email when I hadn't reviewed release PR after a week. Everything is just very heavily automated, which is essential for developing client libraries because there's so many moving parts in this process. So I added more detail. I won't go too much into all of this. You're welcome to read it. This was another sort of differentiating feature around Stainless, was that they have embraced very good development practices. GitHub Actions isn't necessarily a development practice, but And actually Fern uses them as well, so I'll skip that one. But there were just certain indications in the quality of their product that suggest that they're doing things right. So one is scripts to rule them all. This is a convention popularized by GitHub where every project in your company, every code base contains a directory called script or scripts. And inside that directory are scripts that work in any language that allow you to quickly bootstrap the project, get it running, set up your development environment without knowing too much about the intricate details of the project. So we have this for front end, we have this for web. I'm not sure we have it for API, but it's definitely a practice that we value at Replicate because it allows developers to get up and running quickly. They also, at Stainless, use conventional commits. So conventional commits is this practice, it's a specification for writing your Git commit messages in such a way that you're indicating what you're adding some semantic value to the commit message. So if you're adding a feature, then you specify a prefix like feat. If you are fixing a bug, then you use a prefix like fix. And this forces contributors to think at the time that they're doing the work about the nature of the change that they're making. And this ultimately cascades down into semantic versioning, which can infer from the semantic information in the commits what the next version number should be for the software. So I have a whole rant on this, which I can share, but the gist is if you embrace conventional commits, it's a way of letting go of the sort of sentimentality behind versioning and instead allowing machines to infer version numbers based on the semantic messages that you've committed to the project. So we don't have a good history of doing this at Replicate. We've been somewhat shy to use Semver. A lot of our software is pre 1.0. I see this as a really good way for us to break out of that and actually start to embrace some of these really important and useful practices for continuously and safely distributing software. Also, Stainless has this great release process where they accumulate changes in a pull request, and it's not fully automated. It requires a human in the loop to actually review and approve a release before it goes live. So it's kind of the best combination of automation, but also safety checking with humans included. Also, we got some bonus benefits. So Stainless is working on a CLI generator that sits on top of the Go SDK. So if we create a Go SDK, we can easily also revive the idea of having a replicate CLI, which would be amazing. Stainless also has MCP server generation. So every time we cut a new version of the NPM package, we will also automatically cut a new binary server for MCP that maps to our OpenAPI schema. So users can npm install replicate MCP and connect their tools to that, like Claude. They also do Terraform provider generation. And then this was kind of a subtle one, but Stainless is the company that maintains the API clients for companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. So I think it's really in our interests to align the tooling that we're using for our API with these companies. Just because as OpenAI makes requests of Stainless to change or improve the way their products work, that those changes will cascade down to us as another user of Stainless. So that's kind of the gist of how the bake-off went. I want to jump next into actually just giving a quick overview of the Stainless Studio. So when you log into the Studio, you can see here we've got two different client libraries. We've got Python and TypeScript. And when you click into one of these, this probably doesn't look great on my small screen with a giant font, but the gist is you have a few different pieces to work with. So we have our OpenAPI spec, which this is a document that comes from Replicate. And then you have the Stainless config. And the Stainless config is basically a layer on top of our OpenAPI spec that allows us more sort of precise control over what we want to do with that spec during client generation. So there's this resources stanza here, which allows us to sort of control essentially the name spacing of how we want to structure our clients. So for a method like replicate.models.examples.list, we use this sort of nested structure to define the structure of that API call, and that maps to this route in our API. So it's a bunch of different configuration things in here. This code samples thing was the only 2 lines I had to add to the Stainless config to be able to have automatic code snippets added to our JSON output. What else? Whenever you make a change to this, it does this whole sort of cascading update process to open a PR on production that is automatically linted and tested and staged for review by our team. And when you press save, it merges the PR, it writes a change log, it publishes a GitHub release, it publishes to the package registry, etc. So it's all very automated. There's also this amazing diagnostics tab, which shows you various issues that are present in our schema. So that's a quick demo of Stainless. And then lastly, I just kind of wanted to talk about this idea. So this is a recent post from Andrej Karpathy, who's a famous AI person. He says, "It's a new era of ergonomics. The primary audience of your product is now an LLM, not a human. LLMs don't like to navigate, they like to scrape. LLMs don't like to see, they like to read. LLMs don't like to click, they like to curl." So the reason I think this is relevant for us is because the OpenAPI schema that Replicate exposes, not only for our HTTP API, but for each and every one of our models on the platform, that schema is the sort of document that describes in meticulous detail the capabilities of our platform and of our models. So as we improve our schema, the LLMs improve their ability to be able to understand the capabilities of Replicate. So whenever we're working in a tool like this and we see these kinds of errors, and they give us hints about how to improve our OpenAPI schema, which we maintain, it's a huge unlock for us to basically make our product more accessible to language models, which is becoming the dominant way that people write software. I think that's it. I hope this was useful. I'm super stoked about using Stainless. If you want to see more, jump into the Replicate Stainless channel on Slack and check out all the action that's happening there. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.